Hopefully it's familiar to you. It was right out of the reading assignment for today. So let's consider another example. Cutting in line in order to get served faster is wrong according to the universal law formula of universal law, because you cannot cut in a line that at the same time will that everyone cuts in line. If everyone's cutting in line, there is no what? Line, and it ceases to be a way to get served at all. Formal contradiction, right? So in order to get served faster, I will cut in line. Universalized, taken as a universal law, this is self-contradictory. While Kant's way of talking about this seems awkward to many at first, the idea is familiar and intuitive. It's a double standard, right? The person who cuts in line relies on everybody else following the practice while they violate the practice. So they're endorsing it for everybody else and making an exception of themselves. There's the contradiction in a double standard, right? So the person who cuts in line institutes a double standard. His intention both endorses for others and rejects for himself the practice of forming lines to determine the order in which people will be served. He makes an exception of himself, which is the essence of moral wrongness according to the universal law formula, and the essence of unfairness according to almost everyone. Double standards are a pretty common understanding of fairness. If I said everybody with brown hair gets an A, and nobody else gets an A if you don't have brown hair, there's double standards in there, right? Unfairness is being instituted as a policy. So the first answer there, you needed some version of this. In order to get served faster, I will cut in line, or maybe in order to get served faster so I can see the movie with my friends, I'll get cut in line, but it's going to have to be something pretty close to that, right? The second version of it, universalized, is in order to cut in line, in order to get served faster, everyone cuts in line, right? So the idea of the practice of forming lines to get served is endorsed, and the practice of violating that practice is also endorsed, so we get a contradiction. So what does that mean about the morality of cutting in line? Impermissible, right, or prohibited. Again, contradictions generate moral wrongness for Kant. So it's again, rationality is what's driving that, right? Not personal sentiments or inclinations or desires. Yeah.
Can you go over another example where it would be permissible? Like, what was one of them?
Where what would be permissible? Just an example of a permissible one?
Yeah, because they have obligatory and then impermissible, and those are like the two opposites.
They're two opposites, right? And Kant does a better job at pointing out what is wrong for us to do than identifying what we positively ought to do. Yeah, so that's another issue that comes up here. So if what Kant does is it's at least permissible if you can conceive it.
Okay.
Right? If it's conceivable.
But no contradiction.
Then it can't generate a contradiction of will. Okay. Otherwise, it would be always wrong to always do that. So you cannot do it sometimes and do it other times. Just imperfect duty. As opposed to the promise keeping, cutting in line, formals, you're never supposed to do those. Right? So that's why many people think of Kant's theory as an absolutist version of morality there, because he's got those perfect duties in there so, I mean, there are ones where, like, you got to tell the truth to the Nazi at the door and hope that the Nazi's going to come to his senses and start willing to perform the universalizability test about whether he should carry out his project of collecting people for extermination, right? So that's a lot of maxims to worry about, right? To be a conscientious Kantian, you got to be worried about, man, I got to figure out what my maxims are in lots of different scenarios, right? And obviously, Baton Rouge drivers are violating this left and right when they're on the highway, and it's and there's traffic, right? So let's look at another version of the categorical imperative here. So that's the universal law version. Let's look at another version, and there's kind of two parts to this. First, Kant on moral personhood, and then the actual formula. I usually call it the humanity formula or the end in itself formula. It means some basic things. So here's Kant on moral personhood. Non-rational have only a relative value as means. My pen is a non-rational being. My pen has value so long as it's able to do what? Right. So it's use value, right? Use value only. Remember, one of our big problems with contractarianism was accounting for the intrinsic value of individuals. Well, here's Kant trying to build a theory around that from the jump, right? So he says the non-rational have only a relative value as means and are therefore called things. Rational beings, on the contrary, are called persons because their very nature points them out as ends in themselves, that is, as something which must not be used merely as a means. It's a fancy way of saying don't use people. Right? So don't use them as merely as a means, and so far, therefore, restricts freedom of action. It tells you what you can't do, like cut in line, right? And is an object of respect. These, therefore, are not merely subjective ends whose existence has worth only as an effect of our action, in other words, teleologically, again, Kant's rejecting that as a basis for right and wrong, but objective ends, that is, as things whose existence is an end in itself, and moreover, for which no other can be substituted. If my pen runs out, I can get a new pen, but can't get a new India if India's gone, right? So it's because you're a rational being, not an animal. Right? What's there? So an upshot of this is for Kant, we don't really have duties to like our pets. Might be a good thing that you're doing it, but you don't have actual moral obligations to them. In the next theory, you're going to have moral obligations to anything that can experience pleasure or pain, regardless of whether it's a rational being or not. So picking up on that idea of moral personhood, again, it's not about being a member of the Homo sapiens species, but having a rational faculty, right? So loosely, we can just think of that in terms of critical reflection on thinking itself, right? And wondering, what am I doing and what am I not doing, and should I believe that, right? So here's the next version of the categorical imperative. For all rational beings come under the law that each of them must treat itself, so ourselves and others, never merely as a means, but in every case as an end, in every case at the same time as ends in themselves. So like for the utilitarians, again we'll cover next, but it's already been introduced in the reading, so I'll mention it here. I would have obligations to anything that experiences pleasure or pain, right? But here it's got to be rational beings, right? So what do they mean by merely a means? There's a way in which I am using you and y'all are using me as means. How is that right now in our current context of a classroom setting in an educational institution?
Means to a degree.
I'm sorry?
Means to a degree.
Yeah. And then for me, it's I get a paycheck. Not big enough one, but I get a paycheck, right? But that's not using us as mere means. You weren't rounded up against your will and forced to go to LSU, right? If somebody did that to you, your human rights have been violated, according to Kant. So what does he really mean here by a mere means? Because it's clear we're using each other in various ways on a loose notion of use, right? So here's Nora O'Neill that helps us with this. She says, to use someone as a mere means is to involve them in a scheme of action to which they could not, in principle, consent. So informed consent is going to play a big role in Kantian ethics. Each person assumes that the other has maxims of his or her own and is not just a thing or a prop to be manipulated. So what really makes us rational beings is that we can set ends for ourselves. For Kant, that plays a big role here. So justice, remember fairness, requires us that we act on no maxims that use other as mere means or that generate formal contradictions. Beneficence, helping others, requires that we act on some maxims that foster others' ends, though it's a matter of judgment and discretion which of their ends we foster. Some maxims we ought not to be fostered because it would be wrong to do so. So we can get a different test out of Kant, this time the ends test, right? So first, formulate the maxim, apply the ends test. Does acting on the maxim involve violating the dignity of any rational beings? If you can get informed consent, then it's a different matter. But if I'm lying, I'm withholding information that's relevant, then I'm engaged in like manipulation of others, treating them like a thing. Formulate the universalizability test. If the maxim can be universalized without contradiction, successful moral principles have got to survive both tests. So no contradictions, formal or contradictions of the will, and it can't use anybody as a mere means. Another rational being is a mere means. So suppose my job is to work for, let's do a self-service company. And I get a big bonus at the end of the month if I sign up enough people for contracts And as a way of getting signatures, I go over to Tigerland at like 12:30 on a Friday night and start asking people if they want to sign up for cell phone contracts. What are people generally like in Tigerland at 12:30? Put your phone away. Can I will to violate classroom policies? Interesting question. So they're usually, are they of rational minds? No. You can't give informed consent when you're inebriated, so I would be using them as mere means, right, for profit. For Kant, it's not the harm, the physical harm or the psychological harm of rape that makes it bad. It's that you use somebody against their mere means. It's not about pleasure or pain. It's about using them as a rational agent as a mere means. In utilitarianism, it's going to be about the harm, or the harms, really, but not for Kant. So on the universalizability test and the humanity formula, a character like Brian, who's a non-human rational agent, we still have obligations to them. Right? Make some sense? So we got two little tests out of Kant there. I will pause there and ask if there are any questions. Yeah.
So, well, I guess he just stops at human, like, yeah, never mind.
Kant's theory is basically directed at adult, minimally rational beings.
Well, yeah, what does he think about children?
So non-rational, also women.
Oh, God.
Oh, he's got some problems.
So he's from like 1800s?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, he's got some pretty. So there are lots of interesting problems here to worry about. In early Kant, there's some stuff that looks basically racist in it, but by the end of it, people say he's out of that now. But so he's appealed to this idea of universality and beings, but like children are non-rational, so you can treat them more like property. If they run away, you can go get them.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So he's got that appeal. You can get human rights, universal human rights out of Kant really easy, but Kant himself looked like he was excluding some people from that category that we would want to include. So there's where you get to ask the question, is he following his own theory very well? Is he also a product of his own time and the bigotries of that stuff? Have all those sorts of things to worry about. Yeah, Savannah.
So when he says only using people as mere means, he means like, you mentioned earlier that, we're using each other for means as teacher and student.
I'm sorry, say that again?
You mentioned earlier that we were using each other as means for like teacher and student. So like, just as mere means, right? So you can use somebody as means to an end, but
you're not supposed to use someone as a mere means. You can, I got to go get an oil change later this week.
Right.
Right. There's no problem with that because that guy voluntarily opened up a business and I'm voluntarily going to it. So it's the mere means, right? So go back to this passage. To use someone as a mere means is to involve them in a scheme of action to which they could not in principle consent.
Okay.
Each person assumes, so respect for autonomy is a huge thing in Kant. It's up to each of us to perform the categorical imperative and do so rationally to figure out what's right or wrong. You can't be paternalistic. So you're going to get arguments for like classical liberalism out of Kant. You're going to have limited forms of government. There's a libertarian version of Kantianism for sure. There's one of those of utilitarianism as well. But here the idea is, is that internal logic of that maxim universalizable or not? If you get a contradiction, it's wrong. In the next theory, utilitarianism, if the outcomes are overall worse for everybody, then it's wrong. But for Kant, it's not about consequences at all.
I've heard that like this universal law is like the closest that a philosopher has gotten, just like someone's opinion. Is there like contradictions or problems with it?
Oh yeah, well the generality of maxims, we've tried to solve that one a little bit, but some other problems. Do I have obligations to mentally disabled people if they're non-rational?
Okay. Well, because I guess then it's about defining the rationality part.
Yeah, stuff like that. Or if I'm more rational than y'all, doesn't that mean I'm worthy of more respect than you are? Okay. So we got some problems to pop up in there as well. We're going to have problems with each of these. But yeah, generality of maxims. The do-gooder objection to Kantianism. What if I'm doing my duty, but I do it begrudgingly, and I really hate being moral? That doesn't, for Kant's theory, that you would get full moral credit for that, but that looks like, It's better to both do the right thing and to want to do the right thing, right? So again, that's a difference between like kind of how virtue ethics and character-based ethics, like Morris was talking about, are different than Kantianism. This is like, and the next theory is we're trying to come up with a decision procedure, right? Basically, trying to turn morality into an algorithm, basically. Yeah. Other questions? Anybody else got anything? All right. Next up is utilitarianism. They've already introduced that in the Joker article, right? There's a pretty easy answer for the utilitarians about killing the Joker. Joker's got to go on utilitarian grounds, right? Because it would save many more lives and reduce harm if that we killed one in order to save many others, right? It's a trolley problem kind of thing there again. So in the next one, it's going to be about adding up and calculating units of pleasure and pain and how we can work that into a moral theory. All right.